everybody. Thank you for joining us. So just before we go over the overview of the presentation, we just want to introduce ourselves. My name is Caroline Rivera. I am a paralegal at Philadelphia Legal Assistance in the Family Law Unit, and I work under a VOCA, so Victim of Crimes grant.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saadiqa Kumanyika, and I'm a social worker in the Family Advocacy Unit at Community Legal Services.
Hi, I'm Maggie Potter. I'm also a social worker at Community Legal Services in the Family Unit.
Hi, I'm Irene Lindsay Brantly, and I'm Program Director at Women in Transition.
And at today's presentation, we'll be going over what is a crisis, understanding trauma and grief, some tips for working with clients in crisis, and then how to conduct screenings and trauma-informed interviews.
So just a few pads. We're going to pad this training, predictions, acknowledgements, and disclaimers. This is a trauma-informed practice that I learned from taking some trauma-informed courses, and it's kind of trauma-informed because it's helpful for folks who have a trauma background or who have experienced a trauma history to have as much predictability as possible, fewer surprises, kind of an understanding of what to expect. And so we do that at the beginning of our training to help set the stage and set the tone of kind of offering you some of those pads for what's going to happen here today. We're talking about trauma, grief, and crisis. That can be traumatizing. That can bring up a lot of stuff for people, even if it's unrelated to the topics we're talking about. Sometimes talking about trauma or thinking about trauma can bring up previous traumas that one may have experienced themselves. We're going to talk a tiny bit about self-care, but self-care is important. This is just a very small introduction to this field. It can be kind of overwhelming to realize just how much there is to know and how much there is out there in the field of trauma-informed practice, but it can also be exciting. And we'd like to acknowledge collectively that the idea of intersectionality and that trauma, grief, and how people experience them can be influenced by one's gender, race, and class, as well as how they experience the systems of care, diagnosis, and treatment can be different for people who are coming from different race, gender, and class backgrounds.
Okay, thank you. So I want us to take a minute to just reflect together on this moment that we're in right now. So we're in a national crisis. And what does that mean for us? And more importantly, what does it mean in terms of how we interact with our clients? You know, lately I've been hearing a lot of people talk about how they want things to get back to normal, right? So I've been reflecting a lot on that and asking myself, do we really want to get things back to normal? Because one thing that the pandemic has shown us is that normal wasn't really working for our clients. The pandemic has really intensified a lot of the harsh living conditions that many of our clients were already dealing with. It's intensified issues of housing insecurity. It's intensified issues of unemployment. It's intensified surveillance by family regulation system in different ways. So do we really want things to get back to normal? Also, when we think about the recent uprising, the recent murder, the public murder of George Floyd, you know, for many people in the Black and brown community, that witnessing that murder was re-traumatizing. And it was a reminder for a lot of Black and brown folks that in this country, and in many ways, their lives don't matter. And Black and brown people and even poor people are often confronted with that reality through their daily interactions with various systems, including our schools, our healthcare system, through interactions with landlords, the child welfare system. And so, they're constantly confronted with that. And I bring that up, I say all that to say that our interaction with our clients, especially those that are involved in the system, it's really important because our interaction can send them in one direction or another. It can move them in a direction towards feeling isolation, or, especially if they feel like they're being treated in dehumanizing ways, or, if they're constantly told in certain ways that they're not capable of change, or et cetera, it might impact their willingness to continue to fight for whatever battle it is that they're facing at the moment. So it's really important for us to really come to understand our clients, to understand trauma and grief, and to understand all the different layers of issues and things like that could be impacting our clients. Because the more we empower our clients, the more we raise their voice, we elevate their voices, the more likely we'll be able to move them in a direction where they're going to be able to successfully achieve whatever goal it is that they want to achieve. They'll be moving in a direction where they might feel inspired to continue to fight. So you can move to the next thing. Oh, thanks, Maggie.
Yep.
Oh, if you could go back one more slide. So with all that said, currently my colleagues and I at CLS, one of the things that we're doing, this crisis has really allowed us to reflect on how we do our work. And we're constantly asking ourselves questions like, what does it mean to do anti-racist work? How do we elevate the voices of our clients? How do we make them feel valued and empowered? Are we treating clients as individuals? How do clients feel about our services? How do we use our power, etc.? So these are questions that we've started to ask ourselves, and I encourage you all to do the same if you're not already doing that.
So when we talk about crisis, in addition to the pandemic and the racial injustice that our clients are experiencing, they may have layers of personal and family trauma. So it's important that when we're working with clients that we understand that our client defines their own crisis. It's based on their situation and the layers of trauma that they may bring to the table. So it's important to know there's no one definition for crisis, and it's not our job to define or redefine our client's crisis. I'm wondering if anyone can put in a chat a crisis that they've worked with a client, just so we get some idea of some of the issues that are coming to the table with our clients. Anybody have any crisis? Child taken, withheld by other parents, certainly crisis in that family. Eviction notice when benefits turned off, abuse from a partner or parent, international abduction, homelessness. And just remember, these are not just like one issue. Some of these issues are multiple issues for our clients. Loss of DHS benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, and TANF, termination of SSI benefits. Yes, eviction, really housing, death of a family member. These are just some of the things. I thank you so much for chiming in with this so that we can have this in mind as we're going through with our conversations. Encountering with the criminal justice system, yes, for sure. Murder. These are just some of the things that our clients may be presenting with. So thank you for your engaging us with this in the chat. So we're now going to move on and start talking about trauma.
Thank you, Irene, and thank you everyone who's chiming in the chat. We are trying to make it, to the extent that we can, a little bit interactive. So there'll be a few times when we're asking you guys to chime in the chat, and also feel free to put your questions in there, and we can try to address them either in the chat as they come up or at the end if we have time. So as Irene was saying, we're kind of talking about a few different concepts. We're talking about crisis, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about grief, and they're all kind of overlapping a little bit, but we're We're going to try to give some definitions and some background, and just keeping in mind that folks who are presenting with us in a moment of crisis may also have this whole kind of trauma and grief history and experiences that kind of are contributing to that moment of crisis, or that part of what they're presenting with in their moment of crisis is their trauma history. So some definitions of trauma that I like a lot. The word trauma is used to describe experiences or situations that are emotionally painful and distressing and that overwhelm people's ability to cope, leaving them powerless. Trauma has sometimes been defined in reference to circumstances that are outside the realm of normal human experience. Unfortunately, this definition does not always hold true. For some groups of people, trauma can occur frequently and become part of the common human experience. And this is a quote this is a definition that I like a lot, because I think when working with the clients that we see coming through our doors at CLS, they may not have had one singular sort of experience of trauma. They may be experiencing layers of trauma, of chronic trauma, of childhood trauma, but also, the experience of living in poverty or experiencing discrimination. And that kind of comes from the second quote as well, that in addition to terrifying events such as violence and assault, which our clients may also have experienced, they go on to suggest that relatively subtler and insidious forms of trauma, such as discrimination, racism, oppression, and poverty, are pervasive, and when experienced chronically have a cumulative impact that can be fundamentally life-altering. So that I also like to think about in thinking about the experiences of my clients who are coming through the door and what they're bringing with them in terms of their history and their current circumstances. I love the trauma iceberg. It's a kind of common sort of visual that people use for a lot of different, to be able to kind of visualize a lot of different things. But I think in this situation, it kind of reminds us that what you see on the surface isn't the whole story. There's a lot that's not visible below the surface. In fact, most of what that person is bringing to the table is not visible. Their whole history, their perceptions and beliefs and attitudes, their emotional and relational foundation is represented by that part of the iceberg that's underwater and not visible. What we see is sort of like, maybe their behavior, something that they're saying, how they're showing up at court, or how they're showing up in an intake interview. And some of the things that they're doing or saying may seem inexplicable or confusing. And, it helps even to just recognize that, oh, there might be a whole lot more going on beneath the surface. And then Saadiqa actually shared this article with me, Rethinking the Iceberg of Trauma by Jen Alexander, pretty recently. So this is something new that I've added to this kind of layers of this iceberg to understand that collectively, we have not necessarily been confronting the historical trauma and ongoing marginalization of groups that directly cause the trauma that they're experiencing and perpetuate power differentials and systems of oppression, which can then make individuals and families even more vulnerable to future traumas. We can't be trauma informed without fighting these injustices. So I really liked that as like kind of an added layer. We must go deeper into the iceberg and thus wider with our understanding, asking not just what might have happened or be happening to you, but also what has contributed to what might be happening to you or what might have happened to you, and how might my biases and assumptions be problematic in understanding that and understanding where they're coming from. Another kind of quick piece about the brain. Bruce Perry is this researcher, and he's an author, and he's written about this concept. He kind of created this concept of brain states, which I like as like another kind of quick visual way to think about this when someone's in a state of calm versus a state of alert or alarm or fear or terror, that kind of continuum. How well are they able to access their prefrontal cortex? How well are they able to access their abstract or creative brain, their higher order brain functionings of thinking about the future, planning, having conversations in which you're kind of telling them, here are the things that you need to be working on, here's the paperwork that I need from you, or here are the next steps that we need to take. Clients, I think, especially I often reference like court when I look at this chart, that like we expect a client in court to be calm, but they may actually be in a state of alert or alarm or fear due to their history with the systems or with this particular case, or even their own prior court experiences in their past. So they may not be able to best kind of process what's happening and understand all of the orders that are happening, understand who all is in the courtroom with them, and to stay kind of calm and alert and be able to kind of plan and process. So I often kind of talk about, like with my clients, maybe I need to go back through what happened in court, answer their questions, explain what the judge was saying, explain what the worker was, was testifying about, and go over what the court orders were and what the next steps are when they're in a more sort of state of calm and able to kind of process and think about and plan for the future. I also think about this with team meetings. My clients have these family team meetings regularly, and I think about, like, they may need to take a step outside, or we might need to go get a glass of water or take a walk outside the room, to be able to invite them back into a state of more calm or alert, rather than heightened kind of triggered emotions, in order for them to be able to kind of have that conversation and plan and think about what their goals are and how they might meet them. So just some additional kind of points of reference for how trauma might manifest for clients in crisis. Clients might be resorting to less healthy coping strategies. For example, they may be resorting to strategies that have worked for them in the past, or to numb their experiences, such as using drugs or alcohol. They may have a hard time understanding or interpreting or controlling their emotional response if they're being triggered by a previous trauma. Clients may have a pervasive sense of loss of control. In our context, after the removal of their children, that can feel incredibly disempowering, trauma triggering. Clients may find it difficult to trust. I think that's probably true across most of our contexts. And clients may become numb or shut down, and that can also be an indication of the presence of trauma reminders. The sort of two hallmark kind of reactions to trauma are this kind of dissociative reaction of becoming numb or lack of affect or shutting down, or the kind of more hyperarousal, potentially could look like aggressive or loud response. And I think we don't always remember the kind of shutting down version. I've heard people refer to my client and say, she didn't even look like she was paying attention or that she cared in the courtroom, because she looked kind of blank. And that can also indicate the presence of a trauma reminder. So those are just some thoughts about trauma history. We're gonna move into understanding grief and loss.
I would say thank you. There's a lot of overlap between what we may see among clients that are experiencing trauma or grief and loss. So I'm gonna just take a few minutes to focus on grief and loss. Over the past years, there's been a lot of focus on being trauma informed, and I think it's very important. I think we all should be operating in a trauma informed way. But one thing that our work has shown us, particularly our work with parents that are involved in the child welfare system, has shown us that it's really important to have an understanding of grief and loss and how that may impact our clients and how they show up, in the courtroom or in other areas of their lives. So many of our clients are grieving a loss. So what do I mean by that? There are a variety of different types of losses. Oftentimes we hear about bereavement loss, right? That's the loss of a loved one, a family member through death. But there are two other types of losses that I want to bring to your attention. One is ambiguous loss. And this is a loss that stems from somebody being physically present or psychologically absent, or vice versa, someone being psychologically absent or physically present. So in terms of our clients, especially more recently, in the earlier parts of the pandemic, in-person visits were suspended. So a lot of our clients weren't able to actually physically see their children. Their only interaction with their child was through some sort of screen, right? So I have one client, for example, who, I guess in in around February. She just gave birth to her daughter, and then March, the pandemic hit, and she has not, they recently uplifted, they changed the order where in-person visits are now, have started to happen again. But she didn't see her daughter for 6 months. She wasn't able to hold her daughter or anything like that. So that was very, stressful and traumatizing for her. So she was experiencing a form of ambiguous loss. And then there are more subtle or less obvious losses that some of our clients face. So one of them that I'll talk about is loss of identity. So many of our clients, they know they're the biological mother or father of the child, but now they end up wrestling with the fact, with the question of, am I still the mom? What is my role? Because right now my child is in foster care. Like I no longer have legal custody of the child or physical custody of the child. So they end up experiencing that identity loss struggle at times. You can change this slide. So grief is a natural response to someone losing someone or something. And it's important to know that everyone grieves differently. Just like Maggie mentioned earlier with trauma, some people may, she talked about somebody being in court and just seemed to be very disengaged, right? And then some people might appear to be very aggressive or angry. And the same thing happens with grief. Some people may be very emotional. So down below you see styles of grieving. You have the intuitive and instrumental griever. So the intuitive one, they're called like heart grievers. So you may see them crying a lot, and then or they want to talk about their feelings, etc. But then instrumental people that tend to be head grievers, they show less emotion. So they may like intellectualize the problem, the loss. And it's also important to know that the way people experience the loss will differ depending on a variety of different things. The person's age, whether it's the first time that they've experienced the loss, whether it's a secondary loss. So for example, a lot of our clients experience secondary losses where they experience having their child removed. So that's one loss. And then as a result, they might have to, if they're in public housing and they're on the lease their lease, there's like 2 or 3 people on there, and now it's just them because they no longer have their children with them. They have to move to a different house. So losing their home functions as a secondary loss. So that may intensify the level of grief that they may be experiencing. And we can go on to the next one. So with all that said, one thing that I think is important for us to know when it comes to grief and loss, grief scholars and practitioners have discussed the ways in which mourning is an important part of the healing process, right? So when someone isn't really given the opportunity to heal in traditional ways, right? So when we think about bereavement loss, often in our culture, there are rituals or ceremonies that are set in place for us to recognize the loss. But, for people, like the people that we're dealing with, there is no formalized ritual or anything that's in place to help the people process, the families process the loss that they just experienced, that they are experiencing. So in many cases, they're experiencing disenfranchised grief, which is grief resulting from a loss that's hidden or not socially supported, openly acknowledged, or publicly mourned. So, and historically for Black and brown mothers, Dorothy Roberts talks about this. Black mothers have historically been viewed as bad mothers. So in that sense, and often we'll see through media representations, there are a lot of negative representations of Black mothers in the media, which contribute to that. And therefore, Black women or Black fathers, really Black women's grief tend to be less worthy. They're less worthy of getting any recognition. Their grief is less worthy. So we can go on to the next one. So here are some examples of disenfranchised grief. And I'm just going to focus on the first one. Like I mentioned earlier, the loss isn't seen as worthy of grief. So, you know, who cares if she's crying or if she's sad or whatever? She's a bad mom. Her child was taken away. Like, it's her fault, you know, whatever. I mean, there's a number of things that people say about mothers that are, a lot of negative things that they may say about mothers that are DHS or child welfare involved. So, and because of that, it prevents them from getting the actual help and supports that they need to work through the grief. So what we end up seeing is a mother that might be very angry, or a mother that might be numb, or a mother that might end up relapsing or something, right? Because she doesn't have any proper she hasn't developed any proper coping mechanisms to help her deal with the grief. You can go to the next slide. So these are some more examples of disenfranchised grief. In our situation, in the work that I do, we have mothers that are grieving family separation due to foster care, and that grief isn't recognized. As I mentioned earlier, excuse me, you might have parents that are grieving someone who is incarcerated, or a moving or loss of community. So that also happens to a lot of our clients. They may feel isolated or ashamed, you know, because their child was removed. So they don't really want to, they might lose the connection they had with the family, with family members or people in the community, because they're afraid of what they might say about them. So again, they end up grieving in isolation. And you can go to the next one. So here's some grief reactions that we might see from our clients. They might feel like they're going crazy. They might have difficulty concentrating. They might feel sad or depressed, be irritable, feel frustrated or misunderstood. They might experience anxiety or nervousness. They might feel overwhelmed. And like I mentioned before, they might feel numb. They might lack energy and motivation. So those are all things that, you know, we should look out for, because the sooner we're able to recognize some of these grief reactions, like I said earlier, the sooner we'll be able to connect them to the resources that they need to help them to kind of move along, and which will help them move along faster, especially with our clients. It might help them, they might help them move closer to achieving reunification. Excuse me, I can't talk today. It may help them move closer to achieving reunification with their children, you know, if they're able to address whatever issues they're experiencing because of the grief. Thank you.
And now we're just going to talk about tips for working with clients who may be experiencing a crisis or who are in crisis. And I just want to make a note that, you know, we'll be experiencing all different levels of crisis. I'll be talking a little specifically about domestic violence and interpersonal family violence, because that's the work that I do in our unit. But there is overlap, of course, for clients who are experiencing other things. So it's important, you know, not to be an expert at all times, right? As a case handler, you're just kind of gathering the information through different trainings as you're going along. So I'm just going to go over things that we have kind of put into practice after, you know, reflecting together and, you know, applying it for client interactions. So it's really important, kind of from like that first initial contact that you have with a client, to try to be trauma informed. So especially now working remotely, most client communication is just through phone. So it's a little harder than before to kind of build trust with a client, assure clients' safety, assess client safety, or try to kind of get an idea of what state they're at in order to receive services. So when somebody is contacting our office at Philadelphia Legal Assistance, they would go through our family law hotline if they were calling for a family law matter. And of course, if it's family law, there might be subjects that are going on that are very emotional. There might be clients that call and they're very frustrated. They're going through the family court system. So as soon as somebody calls the family law hotline, it's important to, one, begin the conversation by explaining who you are, where they're calling, and the organization. So clients are sometimes given a list of phone numbers at a courthouse, or they're given kind of a big resource guide. So it's important that when clients are calling you, that they know who they're speaking to. It's also important to know that they're speaking to a staff member who is not an attorney. That way you can kind of start off the conversation, being transparent. So another best practice for calls like this are also to immediately try to assess as best as you can the safety of the caller. So they may not always be able to tell you if they're in a safe place to talk. Also, they may not know what type of information you are going to be asking for them, right? So if somebody calls us, we're going to immediately do an eligibility screening. And it is about a 5 to 10 minute phone call where you're giving a lot of personal information. So kind of assessing right away if that caller is safe. A few ways to do that are kind of to listen out for people being coached, which happens a lot. So we might hear somebody in the background kind of answering questions for clients. You can also hear if clients are just on public transportation, excuse me. So if they're not in a place where they can give out something like a social security number, or if they just have a general kind of hesitancy to answer certain questions, it's good to kind of notice those things and see if clients are in a place where they can even have more sensitive conversations. And then if a client has called the wrong place, clients are, like I said before, kind of sometimes calling around, trying to get the help that they need. And so it is good to try to take a moment, hear the client out, see what they need, and if there's some other place, to refer the client. Because especially in Philadelphia, a lot of the legal aids or other, resources for Philadelphians, we're all pretty well connected. And so we can try to get clients to where they need to go. Another thing is to also kind of try and see what kind of brain state the client might be in. So see if they are calm or if they are kind of in a state of panic. I mean, a lot of people call the hotline and the first thing they do is they're crying, or immediately they give you a lot of information about their case. And so it's important to kind of understand that information, try to calm the client down by seeing what you can do for them at that moment. So setting expectations. So saying, I'm a paralegal. Right now, what we're doing is just seeing if you're eligible. This is the information we'll be talking about. And then here's what the action step will be after that. And so that's an important way to kind of try to calm the client down, or see how you can kind of best serve them in that moment. And we can move to the next slide. And now we're just going to use the chat box again. So we want to ask, so what are some of the examples of calls that were difficult to handle during initial contact? So when somebody first calls your organization, are there things that you have seen clients kind of going through, or things that are kind of reoccurring during intake that you've noticed? So do clients call upset? Have you seen clients being frustrated? if you do have examples of that, you can take a minute and put it into the chat box. And just while folks are doing that, as Saadiqa was saying before, a lot of times clients are calling and they're dealing with being separated from their children, especially when people are calling the family law hotline at our office. They are experiencing going through the family court system. There also might just be experiencing domestic violence. And so there's a lot of trauma going on. And so when people are calling us, sometimes that's like the first thing that's happening at the beginning of the phone call. Yeah, so frustration because of no guarantee of getting an attorney. Yeah, absolutely, that happens a lot, and I'll talk about that also in a second. Clients with unmanaged mental health issues, for sure. Clients providing extraneous details that are not relevant to the legal issue. Yeah, misunderstanding of what organizations they are speaking to and what you can do. For sure. Thank you all for sharing that. Yeah, those are all very common things that happen on any type of intake system. And they're all normal things that, that clients are asking for. But it just can sometimes be overwhelming, not only for the case handler, but for the client to call someplace, not have any idea of what their process is, and then also be told that you can't help them and not really give it an explanation why. All right, and we can go forward, I think. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about safety and confidentiality for people who are calling agencies. So this also has to do kind of with that first initial contact, that first phone call, but also just when you're kind of building a relationship with a client, and the more phone calls, the more times you speak to them, it's really important kind of every step of the way to assure confidentiality, and that everything that they're telling you, what it's going to be used for, where that information stays, and who it's going to be shared with. So again, that should be assured on the first phone call, and it should also kind of be reinstated every time you're talking to the client. And it's good practice to try to get that in writing as well, because you really don't know what a client has experienced at another agency, and they could come into your office with already a sense of distrust. So it's good to have something in writing and kind of always explaining that to a client. So sometimes we get some information like that in writing that way. It's something that a client can have that guarantees that they can tell us stuff and that they're in a safe place to do so. So when you're on an initial contact call, so something like an eligibility screening or an intake, you also don't really know what types of questions are going to kind of give a client some type of trauma. You don't know what will re-traumatize a client by you asking a question. So it's also good to kind of warn clients before you're going to be asking for sensitive information. Something that we used to not do, but we've tried to modify the way we ask, is when we ask about citizenship. That's something that some people might not consider a traumatizing question, but we've asked people if they are citizens during a basic eligibility screening, and clients do kind of pull back, will stop, and like assure that it's something that they're safe to answer, and why we need to know that. So before you're asking for things like that, it's good to reassure clients that the information that they're giving will stay confidential. Confidentiality is also really important when you're thinking of safety planning. So when clients are calling your office, it's good to know how you're going to be able to contact them and to ensure survivor safety. What's the best way to contact them? So, asking questions like, is it okay to send you a letter from our office on our office's letterhead. Right? Is that a safe thing? Do you live with somebody where it's not safe if they see that? You know, who can't know that you're receiving legal services or other services? Right? It's also important to know that you're not just collecting information, but you're understanding if that is information you even need. So if somebody gives you their email address, but they're living with somebody who may have access to their email, or they're living with somebody who, you know, in a lot of domestic violence situations can get access to their passwords, you want to make sure that you are avoiding that means of contact. So you may not even need that information. And those are just good things to put into practice so that you can ensure that you're keeping your clients safe, but to also make sure that they're also feeling like you have their safety as a priority. And we can go forward. Another thing too is to try to kind of with the things that you're learning from trainings or the things that you are kind of gathering over time is to create kind of like a toolbox of questions that you have so that you can make sure that you are issue spotting when you're doing client interviews. So for us, you know, we're lucky on our VOCA 3 team that we have a social worker. So, you know, we're spoiled in that way, but it's good to, when you're doing client interviews, see if there are other things, barriers that clients are experiencing that could, one, be preventing them from getting other types of services, two, things that clients are experiencing where they might not know there is a service for that. So things like that could be asking about food insecurity, especially now during the pandemic, where there are more needs that clients will have. You can also ask clients if they are, you know, if they are receiving mental health healthcare, or if they are going through substance use disorder, because these are things that are going to be relevant in their case. So they aren't questions that would be irrelevant to ask. But even when you are finding out that information, to try to make referrals, or if you do have a social worker in your office, to try to connect them with that social worker. That way, one, clients feel like you are giving them holistic support. And even if in your own role, you're limited to what you can do, you sometimes do have the power to give referrals or connect somebody just off kind of like the network you built at your agency. And we can go forward. And then lastly, one of the things that are a little more difficult about domestic violence is a lot of people do not identify as a survivor of domestic violence. And it is important that when we're talking to clients, we are not kind of giving them or building the identity for them. Clients will come to you and tell you their own stories, which doesn't mean that they are or aren't something, but it's important for you to handle something correctly and to make sure that you are keeping clients safe to have the information, whether or not that person will identify themselves in that way. So that's happened a lot when we have on the hotline, we have a standard question where we'll ask about domestic violence. And some people will say no to that. But then when we get to the portion when we're talking about what their legal issue is, they'll say that they are calling about a protection from abuse order. So it's good kind of over time to find ways to see if clients are dealing with violence. And so some of these are up here, you know, has that person ever threatened to harm you? Has that person ever become physical with you? You know, has that person ever withheld money from you? So asking in different ways and kind of building that trust with that client to see if there are things going on that might not be covered just with the direct question of, are you a survivor or victim of domestic violence? And then lastly, it's important to just to empower the client to kind of find out what legal steps they've taken towards separating from the perpetrator, even if they don't end up going through with protection from abuse order, and also the non-legal steps. Because sometimes clients can shut down if you're asking them, about things that they've done involving the system that might not be realistic or might not be safe for them, right? So especially right now, a lot of times one of the questions we're asking is, did you file a police report or have you ever contacted the police? And we know that that's already a high risk thing to do for some of our clients, especially our clients who are people of color. So it's also important to know what non-legal steps they've taken, empower them, validate what they have done so far, even if that's nothing at all, and then kind of work on next steps on what they can take in their case.
All right, thank you, Caroline. So I work for Women in Transition. Once again, my name is Irene. I work for Women in Transition, and we are a domestic violence counseling agency. So most of my presentation will be with domestic violence in mind as the current crisis, or substance abuse as the current crisis. However, a lot of what we'll talk about will apply to whatever crisis you might be dealing with. So we're talking about from the time you schedule the meeting with the client, and bear in mind that we started working on this. I've been doing this presentation for quite a few years, and of course, so there's a lot of information in here that's pre-COVID. I'm going to try to loop it in and make it make sense for the reality that we're experiencing now. So pre-COVID, your space would have been your office or your meeting area, and now it's your living room, your dining room, wherever you are, if you're still working remotely. The thing is, if you're providing information to clients, that's your space. That's your space to share that what this person is going through is not, that they're not alone. If you have posters, if you have resources, if you have information that you can email, especially if you're on Zoom, like right while you're talking to them, to be able to expand what they might be thinking about in terms of their crisis. If you're able to send them information that shows that people, no matter what background they have, could be experiencing this crisis, that's really important to know that for that person to know that they're going to be believed and that there are other people out there who look like them who are experiencing this crisis. In terms of the client space, now this is really important now with COVID because I still work with clients, and I'm finding that clients, in order to get their needs met, have been very creative around their space. And so you want to assess, of course, the privacy and the safety, but clients are calling from their car while they're driving, just to be able to get this appointment taken care of. So you really want to make sure clients are just safe in general, that if they're driving, that they pull over to have this meeting, and that there's an exit plan if the environment becomes unsafe for that client. Next slide, please. Preparation is what you've already started. You're here at this workshop today. You're learning about the dynamics of working with clients in crisis. Be aware, as we mentioned before, that this current crisis is just one area of that person's life. It is not who they are. They may be defining themselves as that way, but it is not who they are. There are many, many other things in their life. There are some specific needs and risks that come with a client's social identity, and we talked about this earlier about intersectionality. Get some training on that. Be aware of what could be coming up for folks who are coming to you in need of services. Be aware of the inherent power dynamic in the client-attorney or client-paralegal relationship. So we have our clients that come and say, I'm going to see my lawyer. I'm going to see my lawyer. They're talking to a legal representative. They may assume that you're a lawyer, and I think one of my co-presenters mentioned this earlier. Be really clear of who you are, because you're expected to have some kind of power with this client, and you want to be clear who you are and know what you can and cannot do. Be aware that the legal system is just one of many systems that the client may be navigating. They may be navigating child welfare. They may be navigating the public benefit system. So they may have a very full calendar, and this work with you is just one of them. And then know about the resources in Philadelphia, wherever you're living in the state, and learn how to make a referral so that you're doing no harm, that you're not sending people through a loop. And Caroline mentioned this, is to say who you are and what you do, because people are given lists of resources and they just start calling, they forget who they called. So when you call and they say, huh, it's because they've called so many people. So really identify yourself and what you do. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, if I could just interrupt quick. This is Kelly, and I'm launching the first of the CLE poll boxes. You'll have a minute and a half to respond, and presenters, please, Irene, please continue. You don't have to wait.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. So when we're talking about do's and don'ts here, about this is if you're on Zoom. I'm trying to make this COVID sensitive. If you're on Zoom, we're experiencing a lot of clients are comfortable with Zoom, but we still see a lot of clients on the phone. So if you're on Zoom with them, you take your eye contact from them. Pay attention to aware of verbal and nonverbal cues. Sometimes things that are not said are what's really happening. Sometimes if someone is in domestic violence, who's in a situation where they don't have power, they don't have a voice, may feel like it doesn't matter, so they don't need to say anything, because you're the professional, you're supposed to figure it out. So you want to pay attention to that. Be aware of your own nonverbal cues. Like someone mentioned earlier about a client with all these extra details that did not really apply to the legal situation. Watch your facial expression with that, because we all get frustrated with that. We just wonder, can we just get down to the work at hand? Like, why are you telling me all this? Be really aware of that. Check in with them. If you see something in their face that changed, it's okay to say, are you okay? Do you need a break? Do you need a drink of water? Do you need 5 minutes? And it's okay to allow time for vent. A lot of us are not comfortable with venting emotions. That's part of training, is being able to be still in that moment while somebody is releasing, crying, or in some way releasing their emotions. We always have tissues on hand when we're working on site. Even if the client has not shed a tear, the tissue says that it's okay, that this is a way that we will give you that time to release. Next, Maggie. Do not assume anything about the client based on their appearance. We've had so many people say, oh, they don't look like an abused person. They're all well put together. They don't look disheveled or anything. They look fine. Matter of fact, they have a chip on their shoulder. Well, the chip on the shoulder may be just for you, because at home they have no ability to have a chip anywhere. They're walking on eggshells. Be careful about making negative comments about those involved in the client current crisis. Depending on where that client is in their process, they still may be very protective of the person who's involved in that crisis, especially domestic violence. Try not to, we always say clients are driving the bus. It's their bus, it's their life. They're taking the steps that they can based on what they feel like they can do. It's important that we not make them feel guilty because they're not on our timetable, and that we're not judging their decisions. And really important, do not make promises you cannot keep. So don't speak for other programs. Don't say you go over there and you're definitely going to get PFA. You go here and you're definitely going to get benefits. Really try to wrap your language around that. So some of the skills, and I'm sure this is not rocket science, it's good to have a reminder about listening skills. about non-judgmental. So words like would, should, and could are not, that's judgmental language. Reflective listening, you want to clarify, you want to make sure that you heard what the client said. If you have to rephrase it and reflect it, and you don't want to say, well, you were so upset I couldn't understand you, because then that's about you. You want to make it about them. I'm trying really hard to be able to get the information I need to provide the services that you need. So I just want to repeat what you said to make sure I got it right. Asking direct questions, but more importantly, explaining why you ask questions. Because if you have a person in a domestic violence situation and you ask about their children, not everybody knows that child welfare is separate from other services. And so some people think it's all connected. So if you start asking about children, they may get on the defensive because they think we're all connected. Be careful about pressuring clients. Accept the answer. It may not make sense to you. It may not. You may wind up shaking your head, but that's the answer that you're working with at the time. Be sure to explain confidentiality, not just the conversation with you, but your work product. Explain all that because that's important in terms of trust. Okay. So validate, because, you know, like for a lot of times you may be the first person that this client actually told his story to. You know, they may not have come to women in transition. They may have gone to legal services first. And so you want to validate that experience, that they don't deserve it. This must be challenging, those types of things. And then this is really, really important to thank them for sharing, because we are doing this work. We're just trying to get the work done. We're trying to get forms filled out. We're trying to do all this. And pre-COVID, some of us weren't even looking at the client. We're just typing as we're getting questions answered. It takes a lot to share, especially for domestic violence survivors, to share what has been happening with them, with the situation of somebody that they are in a relationship with who says they love them and treat them this way. That is very hard to share. Thank them for sharing. And then acknowledge your role and acknowledge the limitations in the system. I mean, like I say, our clients, when they get ready to go see a lawyer, they think that's all, everything's gonna be fine. The lawyer's gonna fix everything, and we really can't. Next slide, please. Safety planning. Safety planning is a process, not a product. It's often not a written document. It can be one question. Is it safe to call you? Is there a safe time to call you? What happens if someone else answers the phone? The answers to that question could be a safety plan. You really want to make sure that you build, that the client is in this situation and is still alive. They're doing something right to be safe. So you want to build on that. What have you done that's working? What are the challenges for you? Because they may feel that nothing is working, but they're still safe. They're still there and they're still safe. What have you been doing, and how can we support you? If there's a PFA or other order involved, helping the client understand that that's a tool, and helping them know how to use it for their overall safety plan. Of course, it's not a guarantee of safety, but to know how to use that, because they're hearing, and a lot of other people are telling them, oh, that order doesn't do anything. They read in the news this person was killed, but they had a PFA. So you really want to let them know how it can be a good support for overall safety. Next slide. And one more thing, and this is really important for all of us who are doing this work, is self-care. I talked about the powerlessness dynamic. So you can feel powerful, like this person is coming to me for support. I have the answers, but you can't make them do what you want them to do. You can't make them do anything. And so you put all this energy into the power that you think you have, and you walk away because the client is not able to do what you want them to do. So now you struggle with that, and you have to figure that out. Figure if your triggers for you are around that and figure out how to leave that at work, which is really challenging now because at work is home and at home is work for a lot of us. Really think about your role. You talked about your role in defining the crisis and knowing that the client defines the crisis. So you're empowering the clients with legal information and advocacy. You can't fix anybody. You just can't. And be honest about what you can and cannot do. I can't say this enough. Because, and be really clear about it, as Caroline said, like some stuff just needs to be written down because we see the clients after they come from legal offices and they tell us stuff that we know didn't happen, but it's their understanding of what happened. So be really clear about that and replenish yourself. Find ways, especially during now, to replenish yourself so that your vessel can take the next interview that you have. Next slide. So now we're going to go. I don't know if we have time for breakout.
Yeah, I think we should have time. We're just a few minutes past 3, and I think we wrap up at 3:30. So
okay.
I think we were hoping that this would be about how much time we had left to do some small group conversations to make this a little bit more interactive. Kelly, I think you were going to break us into groups of maybe 3 to 5 people. And we had come up with this question of like, what are some of the takeaways that you would use from this conversation moving forward with your work in light of the current crises we're experiencing and also the crises that you deal with on a day-to-day basis with your own clients. And we covered topics like trauma and brain states, grief, disenfranchised grief, initial contacts with clients, active listening and preparation for interactions with clients, safety planning. So please I think we'll take about 15 minutes to do a breakout and then come back and do a little bit of sharing and answering questions. Maybe let's say 12 minutes, Kelly, to do breakouts, please.
Sure. I can do 11 rooms with 5 to 6 people each, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do that then.
I'm gonna not go back to sharing my screen because it's kind of nice to be able to see people, but I wondered if people might want to share, or any of my co-presenters, I'm sort of taking the reins here, but wanted to share back from the small group conversations that they had. We have about, 10 more minutes before, I don't know if there were questions in the chat that we didn't respond to, or if there's thoughts from the breakout rooms that people wanted to share.
Yeah, so I can share what we talked about in our breakout room. We talked about kind of different responses that, organizations have been giving about race and kind of new conversations that they were having, but kind of how that conflicts with what people are just actually seeing in court, and kind of judges, attorneys kind of still having, just racist interactions with clients. Attorneys wearing, or cops wearing like Blue Lives Matter shirts to the courtroom. So just kind of in general, there's steps being made to like have conversations about it and like committees being made to have certain discussions, but just on an individual level, there's still so much work to do. And so that's kind of what we talked about in our breakout room, is things that we've just seen that have been really counterproductive recently.
Thank you, Caroline. Does anybody else want to share from some of what was the conversation in their breakout room?
So this is Irene. We talked a lot about secondary trauma and vicarious trauma and its impact on the work, on our ability to get the information that we need, but also deal with clients who are evasive or who just don't have a good memory of what happened, who are not able to give us information in chronological order, or in any kind of way that makes sense, and how to deal with that without letting our own internal frustrations with our own stuff, with COVID, with family, with everything else that we're going through as individuals, not impact the way we deal with that kind of client who's overwhelmed and presenting in a way that makes our work even more challenging.
Other folks, are people able to unmute themselves if they want to share anything?
I can make people able to do that if you'd like me to.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize people couldn't.
Sorry, we usually mute for people for
Yeah.
webinars this size, but I can change it so people can unmute themselves. Okay, you should be able to, attendees.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. Would
Sure.
anybody else like to unmute themselves and share any feedback or commentary from their breakout session? I'll say in my group, everyone was saying how much they appreciated the part of your portion of the training, Irene, where you talked about thanking people for sharing their story, and how that we're often sort of experiencing this dual pressures of, like, not pressures necessarily, but like wanting to kind of do things quickly because there's so much need and we have to see a lot of clients and we want to help as many people as possible, but taking that time and being present in the moment and kind of you know, related to that, taking the time to thank people because this might be the first time that they're sharing something. That resonated for everyone in my group.
And that also resonated with a couple of people in my group too. Just, you know, one person talked about, you know, for them, it was important hearing that when you talked about that, Irene reminded them that it's not about them, it's about the client. And, you know, that we really need to kind of take the time and be present. And because oftentimes we can be overwhelmed and, you know, we have a lot of work and we're focused on just getting the information from the client, but we need to like step back and, you know, try to really hear and listen to the clients, try to empathize with clients, etc. And anyone in my group can add to what I just said too.
I'm like, now I can see the names. I'm going to start calling on the people that I know. See you guys.
Maggie, I'll save you the trouble. It's Susan.
Yes, I was just going to call.
I just want to say thanks to the presenters, and you know, I'm so glad that you all were willing to do this program for us, and I value the experiences of social workers and, you know, mental health providers and the front, you know, more somewhat frontline people at our legal aid organizations. You are such an important piece of the whole process of us providing access to people, and it's so important to set the tone right when people first contact us. And also, you really take the brunt of a lot of the frustration and the trauma that you're talking about, because you're the first person that you know, the client is often reaching, and they're in crisis and they're so upset. And when they hear something that they might not, you know, you have to tell them, well, I can't guarantee that you're going to get a lawyer, or I have to ask you all these millions of questions before I can even tell you if we can help you or not. People are so frustrated with that. And it's so important to recognize like how difficult that can be for somebody who's, you know, really just needs some help. So thank you, and really important, great stuff. And if you're looking for things to talk about, maybe some of the paralegals or people who do intake on the hotline could talk a little bit about how they diffuse that situation with what do you exactly say?
So while we're waiting for someone to jump in to speak to their experiences, I'm going to launch the second of the 2 CLE box polls. It'll be up for 1.5 minutes, and presenters, please, you don't have to wait or anything. Please continue.
I don't know, Caroline, did you want to speak to that question kind of about like how do you diffuse a difficult sort of situation or a frustration that a client might be, or an intake might be expressing?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples that we've had recently, but I know a few weeks back, we got a call and the person was actually at family court, 'cause I think in Philadelphia. So we just do custody. So we don't do dependency at PLA. But I think dependency is still like physically, those people are still physically going to court. So we actually had somebody call the hotline. They were still at the courthouse. And I think they just had a really bad court experience. And so they were calling screaming and like needed to speak to somebody right away. And the person did need to speak to somebody right away, right? But the issue was that like they're at our office, that would have been a waste of their time. And so to explain to this person, they wanted to speak to an attorney. And yeah, Susan's right that sometimes paralegals or like intake workers, they're kind of like the gates to the attorneys in the office. And that can be really frustrating for clients. And it is reasonable for clients to say, well, I want to speak to somebody who I trust with something as special as my case. So that took a while. It was like a 5-minute phone call of this person just yelling. But kind of the way we got through that was I just really needed to explain to them that while I don't have all the information, I do have screening questions to see if it was dependency or custody. And so I really needed to get a few questions answered. Once I get those questions answered, I can send you to where you need to go, or another person that might be able to assist you. And sometimes it doesn't work. Like sometimes you do have somebody they can't receive it at that time. They're just not in a state where they can receive that information. But yeah, sometimes it takes a minute. Sometimes you do have to let somebody kind of get that initial frustration out. But yeah, that's sometimes what the issue is. Sometimes it's just somebody like, I really want to speak to an attorney right now. But you just have to explain the process and also explain that like, it will be okay. Like it'll be okay right now if we just get through what we have to get through to get you to the person you need to speak to. But yeah, it's all different types of calls and they can all just be really difficult to like navigate.
I would add just like my tone of voice and my like to the extent that I can stay kind of in that calmer state. And I'm sure Caroline, you probably also like have this demeanor or like embody this when you're doing intake, but like those kind of mirror neurons can you know, if I'm staying a little bit calmer and am able to kind of not kind of escalate that emotional or frustration kind of feeling, that I find that to be very helpful as well. Recognizing and validating, as Irene said so many times, that this is a frustrating situation and that this is really a valid concern that they're having, but also not trying to kind of like talk over them or get into a fight with the person on the phone.
Yeah, I then to add to that, I definitely agree. Validating is so important and using reflective listening. Like, okay, so this seems to be the thing that's bothering you, and like I hear you, and wow, that does seem to be very frustrating. I'm so sorry that you have to go through this right now. And then, you know, making for me, making commitments, right? Saying that this is what I can do for you. Like I make sure I do that with all my clients. I'm gonna get back to you in an hour or in 2 days, or I know this might not be the immediate result that you want to get, but we're going to work together through this, you know, like using that we language, like, and yeah, just, I think the biggest thing is, because so many times, I mean, so many of our clients experience disappointment, you know, when they're interacting with various systems, and, you know, they feel like and it's just, even if you're not interacting with the system, nowadays, it's just hard to get help. When you call a company for whatever, you have to go deal with some automated like machine. And so just, letting them know you're going to hear back from me in a couple of hours. And this is the information that I'm going to get for you. And if I can't help you, kind of like what Caroline was saying, if I can't help you with this, I'm going to connect you to this person, and this person will be able to do X, Y, Z for you. So yeah, those are some things that have been helpful for me.
Irene, did you want to add anything? I think we're pretty close to out of time here, but if you had any last comments.
I just wanted to, there are resources at the end of the slide.
Oh yeah.
So I just wanted to remind everybody to look at those resources. Our contact information is also available as a slide as well. If you have specific questions about anything that we've said, feel free to contact us. These are that's the contact information, and the slide before that are the resources. So it's very important with resources that you become familiar with the resources in your area, so that you're doing no harm, that you're not unwittingly sending a client through a information loop or through a resource loop, where you're sending them somewhere where that agency doesn't even do what you think they do. So it's important to find out what specifically your resources do before you make a referral.
Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters for your time and for sharing this really important information with us. Thanks to everyone that attended today. Hopefully this gave you something to think about in your dealings with clients and in taking care of yourself. So everyone have a good rest of the day. Take care, be well, and hopefully we'll see you at another training soon.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.